Lena Hartfield boarded the midnight train from Ellimore, her suitcase light and her heart even lighter. The windows of the train gleamed like polished obsidian under the station's antique lamps, and as she stepped inside the dimly lit cabin, a gentle warmth enveloped her. She was alone, as she had hoped, in a softly cushioned compartment that smelled faintly of lavender and dust. The train began to roll with a whisper, barely louder than a sigh, and soon the sleeping world outside blurred into a painter's brushstrokes of gray and blue. The seat across from her remained empty. Lena allowed herself to stretch her legs and unfurl the hand-knit blanket her grandmother had pressed into her arms before she left. "You'll need this," she had said in her soft, wavering voice, her eyes not meeting Lena's. "The valley gets cold at night." Lena had nodded, though she had no real idea what awaited her in the valley. Only that she had to go. The letter had been simple, handwritten in sepia ink and signed with the initials MS, come to Whispering Valley. There are things you need to know. No return address. No explanation. But Lena had felt something when she read those words. A tug, gentle yet persistent, as if the ink itself had reached into her and whispered, "Come home." The train wound through old hills and mist-covered fields. Occasionally, they passed through tiny hamlets, where warm yellow light flickered in windows and chimney smoke curled into the night, like questions never answered. Lena closed her eyes for a while and allowed the rhythm of the wheels to echo into her bones. The dreams came slowly, soft at first, like rain against a faraway roof. Then they deepened. She stood on a path lined with silent trees. Their leaves were silver under a moon that did not shine from above, but from within. The ground was soft, not with soil or grass, but with memories, scattered pages, old keys, and small broken clocks that ticked backward. She walked, and the trees whispered her name. Lena. She turned and saw no one. Only a figure far ahead, barely visible through the thick mist. She moved toward it, but the figure remained distant, always just out of reach, as if time itself stretched around them like taffy. When she called out, her voice came back to her doubled, echoed in another tone, higher, almost childlike. Then the train jolted softly. She opened her eyes. They had arrived. The sign on the platform read, Dunbrook Station, and it stood under a bent lantern, which swung lazily in the misty air. Lena gathered her things and stepped onto the platform. The cool air wrapped around her like a shawl, and she pulled her grandmother's blanket tighter around her shoulders. There were no other passengers. The train, as if it had delivered her and fulfilled its purpose, sighed once and rolled away into the mist. A single figure stood waiting near the edge of the platform. He wore a dark woolen coat and a newsboy cap pulled low over his brow. "Miss Hartfield?" he asked, his voice mellow, unhurried. "Yes." "I'm Elias." "MS sent me." Lena opened her mouth to ask who MS was, but the words did not come. Instead, she nodded and followed him. They walked in silence through the fog-bound streets of Dunebrook, a village where time seemed to have slowed to a pause. Gas lamps flickered on every corner. The cobblestones underfoot were uneven and dimpled with age. Occasionally, a shutter banged softly in the wind, but no one stirred. Even the dogs lay curled on porches, dreaming of some forgotten chase. Elias led her through a wrought iron gate and up a winding gravel path, flanked by tall yew trees. At the end of it stood a house. The house. She knew it before she could think it. It stood tall and solemn, with ivy clinging to its flanks and a watchful tower that rose above the treetops. Windows blinked faintly with light, and Lena felt, not for the first time, that the house was alive, watching, waiting. Inside, the house was warm. Firelight danced in the hearth, and the scent of honeyed wood and old books filled the air. Elias hung her coat and gestured to a door on the left. The study. She's waiting. Lena stepped inside. The woman who sat in the high-backed chair looked not much older than Lena herself, though her hair was the color of moonlight, and her eyes were a deep violet that held entire storms within them. She rose slowly and offered her hand. "I'm Mayra Sable," she said. M.S. Lena took the hand. It was cool and dry. "You sent the letter." Mayra nodded. "And you came. Good. That means the bond is strong." Lena blinked. "What bond?" Mayra turned toward the fire. "You'll understand soon. But first, you must rest. The house remembers you, even if you don't remember it. And the valley has its own way of teaching." Lena wanted to ask more, but a wave of exhaustion pulled at her. The soft rustle of the flames, the murmuring wind outside, the warmth of the room. All of it became too much. "Your room is upstairs. Third door on the right," Mayra said. "The house will guide you." Lena climbed the staircase slowly, her fingers brushing the smooth banister polished by generations of hands. At the top, the hallway stretched out like a memory she hadn't yet had. Each door she passed whispered something. Snippets of lullabies, echoes of laughter, a distant violin playing somewhere below. She reached the third door. Inside, the room was waiting. A brass-framed bed stood beneath a window that looked out over the valley, though the mist hid all but the nearest trees. The bedding smelled of lavender and old linen. A rocking chair sat beside the hearth, and on the mantel stood a music box. She wound it. A tune played, familiar, haunting. She had heard it before. Somewhere. Lena lay down, the blanket tucked around her, the music box still whispering its tune. The room darkened, and her eyes drifted closed. In her dreams, the valley opened. She stood on a hill covered in wild thyme and bluebells. The air shimmered with golden dust, and the sky above shifted between dusk and dawn in a dance that had no end. Below, the valley breathed, alive and slow, its trees moving like the swell of a sleeping creature. Rivers sang as they ran over crystal stones, and birds with glass feathers sang songs of forgotten days. She saw herself, younger, standing at the edge of a lake whose surface reflected not just the sky, but all her past selves, layered like petals. She heard Mayra's voice. "You've been here before. You just don't remember." Lena turned to speak, but the lake rippled, and the dream changed. She stood in a chamber of mirrors. Each reflected her, but different. One held a child, eyes wide and curious. Another, a teenager with fire in her voice. Yet another, a woman aged with sorrow. Each Lena stared back at her, silently mouthing words she could not hear. In the center of the room was a single chair, and on it, a book. She walked forward. The book opened by itself. The first page read, "This is the story of how she returned," and remembered. Then the pages turned, faster and faster, until wind rose and light poured from the mirrors. The chamber dissolved into silver fog. Lena awoke with tears on her cheeks. Outside, the mist had cleared slightly, revealing the valley below. It stretched out, endless and serene, dotted with whispering trees and soft hills. Somewhere in that expanse was an answer, and Lena would find it. The moon hung low over the velvet hills of Alderwyn. its pale light casting soft silvery patterns across the slow-moving river that whispered along the edge of the valley. And as the wind stirred the reeds into gentle motion, an old wooden bridge creaked under the weight of silence that had not been broken for years. In a cottage nestled at the foot of the hill, where ivy wound around the windows and the scent of chamomile floated on the air, a woman named Elira sat in a rocking chair, her fingers wrapped around a mug of tea, so warm and fragrant that even the night seemed to pause and inhale its comfort. And though the fire crackled softly in the hearth, her mind drifted far beyond the flickering shadows on the wall, back through the years and memories that now felt like petals pressed in a forgotten book, soft and faded, delicate but enduring. And she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the stillness of the valley seep into her bones, letting the ancient hush settle on her shoulders, like a shawl spun from the stars themselves. For it had been many seasons since the world had last asked anything of her. And now the only request that remained was the patient unfolding of quiet hours, one after the other, like ripples across the surface of an undisturbed lake. Beyond the hills, the forest breathed in its sleep, the pines sighing with each slow gust of wind that passed through their needles. And deep within that forest was a path few remembered, a path made not of stone or earth, but of forgotten songs and childhood dreams, woven together into something invisible to those who no longer believed in quiet magic. And it was down that path that Elira had once walked long ago, guided not by light, but by the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in harmony with the world around her. When the sky was clearer and the stars brighter. "Your room is upstairs. Third door on the right," Mayara said. "The house will guide you." Lena climbed the staircase slowly, her fingers brushing the smooth banister polished by generations of hands. At the top, the hallway stretched out like a memory she hadn't yet had. Each door she passed whispered something, snippets of lullabies, echoes of laughter, a distant violin playing somewhere below. She reached the third door. Inside, the room was waiting. A brass-framed bed stood beneath a window that looked out over the valley, though the mist hid all but the nearest trees. The bedding smelled of lavender and old linen. A rocking chair sat beside the hearth, and on the mantel stood a music box. She wound it. A tune played, familiar, haunting. She had heard it before. Somewhere. Lena lay down, the blanket tucked around her, the music box still whispering its tune. The room darkened, and her eyes drifted closed. In her dreams, the valley opened. She stood on a hill covered in wild thyme and bluebells. The air shimmered with golden dust, and the sky above shifted between dusk and dawn in a dance that had no end. Below, the valley breathed, alive and slow, its trees moving like the swell of a sleeping creature. Rivers sang as they ran over crystal stones, and birds with glass feathers sang songs of forgotten days. She saw herself, younger, standing at the edge of a lake whose surface reflected not just the sky, but all her past selves, layered like petals. She heard Mayara's voice. "You've been here before. You just don't remember." Lena turned to speak, but the lake rippled, and the dream changed. She stood in a chamber of mirrors. Each reflected her, but different. One held a child, eyes wide and curious. Another, a teenager with fire in her voice. Yet another, a woman aged with sorrow. Each Lena stared back at her, silently mouthing words she could not hear. In the center of the room was a single chair, and on it, a book, She walked forward. The book opened by itself. The first page read, "This is the story of how she returned and remembered." Then the pages turned, faster and faster, until wind rose and light poured from the mirrors. The chamber dissolved into silver fog. Lena awoke with tears on her cheeks. Outside, the mist had cleared slightly, revealing the valley below. It stretched out, endless and serene, dotted with whispering trees and soft hills. Somewhere in that expanse was an answer, and Lena would find it. The moon hung low over the velvet hills of Alderwyn, its pale light casting soft silvery patterns across the slow-moving river that whispered along the edge of the valley. And as the wind stirred the reeds into gentle motion, an old wooden bridge creaked under the weight of silence that had not been broken for years. In a cottage nestled at the foot of the hill, where ivy wound around the windows and the scent of chamomile floated on the air, a woman named Elira sat in a rocking chair, her fingers wrapped around a mug of tea, so warm and fragrant that even the night seemed to pause and inhale its comfort. And though the fire crackled softly in the hearth, her mind drifted far beyond the flickering shadows on the wall, back through the years and memories that now felt like petals pressed in a forgotten book, soft and faded, delicate but enduring. And she closed her eyes for a moment, letting the stillness of the valley seep into her bones, letting the ancient hush settle on her shoulders, like a shawl spun from the stars themselves. For it had been many seasons since the world had last asked anything of her. And now the only request that remained was the patient unfolding of quiet hours, one after the other, like ripples across the surface of an undisturbed lake. Beyond the hills, the forest breathed in its sleep, the pines sighing with each slow gust of wind that passed through their needles. And deep within that forest was a path few remembered, a path made not of stone or earth, but of forgotten songs and childhood dreams, woven together into something invisible to those who no longer believed in quiet magic. And it was down that path that Elira had once walked long ago, guided not by light, but by the sound of her own heartbeat echoing in harmony with the world around her. When the sky was clearer and the stars brighter, until all she was rest. And in that rest, she became the valley itself. Or rather, she remembered that she had always been part of it, woven into the breath of the wind that stirred the tall grasses, into the hush of the moss-covered stones that marked forgotten paths, into the lull of the river that curved through alder trees like a silver lullaby. And in that remembering, there was no effort, no reaching, only returning, like a tide drawn back to shore by the softest hand of the moon. And as the night deepened around her, the creatures of the dark emerged not as threats, but as old neighbors coming quietly to share in the stillness. Foxes with eyes like molten gold, slipping through the hedgerows, badgers lumbering beneath the brambles, fireflies blinking like thoughts, trying to form and fading before they solidified. And above them all the stars blinked slow and sure, as if they too were breathing with her. And in this great breath, the inhale of shadow, the exhale of light, Elira floated gently, without direction or demand, the rhythms of her life now distant bells, chiming softly from across a great lake of calm. And it was on this lake, now appearing before her in that dream space beyond the boundaries of waking, that she found herself gliding in a small wooden boat, the oars moving without her effort, dipped not in water, but in velvet starlight. And as she drifted across the smooth surface, the boat whispered to her, not in words but in feelings, in stories carried on wind and memory, and all around her the lake mirrored skies full of constellations she'd never learned the names of, but somehow recognized, patterns from stories older than language, tales told by silence and shaped by wonder. And on the far shore, lit only by lanterns of floating blossoms, stood a figure she somehow knew, tall and gentle, their face ageless and kind, not a person so much as a presence that had watched over her always, in dreams and childhood hopes, in prayers uttered quietly under breath. And as her boat came near the shore, the figure extended a hand, not to pull her ashore, but simply to touch her fingers with their own. And in that touch was a memory of warmth, of belonging, of safety so complete it brought tears to her dreaming eyes. And the figure whispered, "You have come far, and now you may rest." And even though no journey seemed to have happened, Elira knew that she had indeed come far, not in miles but in heartbeats, in the soft untangling of worry, in the deep exhale that had taken a lifetime to complete. And she stepped onto the shore of that silent dream realm, the lantern blossoms drifting around her feet, and followed the figure down a path lined with night-blooming flowers that glowed with soft blue light, and the air smelled like memory and wild honey, like comfort and clean rain. And each step brought her deeper into a place she hadn't known she'd missed, where laughter lived in the trees and lullabies curled like smoke from the stones. And as a long, soft exhale that lasted into eternity, stretching gently across the unseen fabric of everything, weaving her presence into the gentle spaces between moments. And in that infinite exhale, Elira became less of a person and more of a rhythm, a kindness in the air, a quiet pause in the world's endless song. And the glade held her with the patience of the stars, with the forgiveness of soft earth, and the joy of morning light that takes its time spilling across the hills. And she dreamed without dreaming, thought without thoughts, existed without effort, her essence now mingling with the scent of pine and the hush of snow that falls when no one is watching. And time, so often measured and counted, dissolved into something endless and sweet, where one could walk across centuries as easily as through tall grass. And there in that suspended glow of absolute peace, the universe itself leaned closer, not as a thing to behold, but as something that could finally be felt, like a warmth blooming from within, like a hand placed over the heart that whispers, "You belong." And in that blooming Elira remembered every moment she had forgotten. The sun-warmed stones beneath her childhood feet, the sound of her name carried on wind, the faces of those she had loved and who had loved her even after they had faded into memory's mist. All returned now, not as longing, but as presence, living again in this endless dusk where no sorrow could follow and no clock could chase. And around her, the trees began to hum a lullaby with no melody, only feeling. And their song cradled her deeper, deeper still, into the soft cradle of cosmic sleep, where everything she had been, daughter, sister, lover, wanderer, healer, became threads in the great tapestry of stillness that wrapped the world in comfort. And within that stillness others stirred too, not with noise but recognition. The dreamers who walked alongside her in their own drifting boats across lakes of starlight, all journeying toward this shared sanctuary where the soul rests, not alone, but as part of a gentle collective, a meadow of breathing hearts bound not by time or place, but by the shared experience of peace. And their dreams mingled, brushed together like butterfly wings in twilight, sharing warmth, sharing calm, sending ripples of serenity through the glade that echoed beyond the trees, beyond the hills, back into the waking world, where the wind carried a softness that couldn't quite be explained, only felt by those who paused to notice the hush between bird calls or the way sunbeams rested on windowsills as if reluctant to leave. And so the world was soothed, unknowingly, by those like Elira, who now slept at its edges, guardians of the hush, keepers of calm. And in the center of her endless dream, she saw the cottage again, the fire glowing low, the rocking chair still gently swaying, though no one sat in it. And she understood that though she had left the chair, her peace remained there, a residue of presence that blessed the space with rest. And the house would now carry her stillness like a bowl carries water, giving sips of comfort to anyone who stepped over its threshold. And even the birds at the windowsill would feel it, chirping more quietly, resting more often. And the ivy that climbed the walls would grow a little slower, basking not in the sun alone, but in something deeper, the memory of love wrapped in stillness. And this understanding settled into Elira's dreaming self, like sunlight through water, illuminating all the corners she hadn't known still waited for peace. And as the stars above her pulsed slower and dimmer, as if entering slumber too, her final thoughts were not thoughts, but gentle sensations, wordless thank yous to the world that had held her, to the wind that had carried her, to the dreams that had remembered her, even when she had forgotten them. And finally she became not even breath, not even presence, but the quiet that exists just before a dream begins, the stillness that lives behind every heartbeat, the pause between waves. And in that place, she remained perfectly, softly, forever at rest, and yet not vanished. For in this sacred quietude, Elira's essence became part of the very breath of the valley, the whispering wind in the tall grasses, the gentle hush that calmed the forest's edge, the shimmer on the river's surface just before sunrise. And though no one could point to where she had gone, her presence lingered like warmth in a seat just vacated, like the echo of a kind voice that settles in the corners of a room. And those who wandered through the valley in the years that followed, travelers seeking nothing more than silence, poets chasing the shape of a feeling they could not name, tired souls needing a place to simply be. Each found themselves inexplicably comforted, their burdens growing lighter with each step, their thoughts quieting as if the trees themselves were listening, and the birds would fall still in reverence. In a world veiled by soft clouds and woven through with the breath of ancient trees and the sighs of timeless oceans, there existed a place so deeply quiet, so untouched by urgency, that time itself seemed to slow its footsteps and stretch each second into eternity. And it was here, in this forgotten cradle of calm, that a woman named Aranel found herself wandering, not by plan or map, but by the soft guidance of weariness, of a soul long burdened by the sharpness of clocks and the noise of lives lived too quickly. And as she stepped barefoot along a path of moss and fallen petals, the air around her hummed with a gentle resonance, a music not heard with ears, but felt within bones, as if the earth was singing a lullaby to all who would listen. And Aranel, whose days had been filled with the weight of decisions and voices and the ever-pressing noise of survival, now found herself dissolving into the stillness, her heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of the wind as it curled through the towering trees whose branches arched like cathedral ceilings, heavy with leaves of silver and soft blue, their light catching the sky's golden pink glow as evening began to stretch its fingers over the land. And in this place, names and stories fell away, not lost, but simply resting, set down gently like coats no longer needed in a warm room. And Aranel breathed in the air, thick with the scent of lavender, old wood, and something faintly like snow, though no frost touched the ground, and each breath felt like the first after lifetimes spent holding it in. And with every step she took along the winding trail, she passed under arches of flowering vines that released bursts of drowsy perfume, and beside the path ran a brook, its waters so still and clear it reflected not just the sky but her thoughts, each ripple like a memory surfacing and fading without pain. And above her the sky deepened into velvet, constellations slowly winking awake, their light not sharp but soft, like candle flames behind linen. And as she walked deeper into the forest, if it could be called a forest, for it felt more like a dream grown from the roots of peace, she began to sense others here, not seen but deeply known, presences like the warmth of a blanket pulled over you on a cold morning, familiar and comforting. And they did not speak with words but with feeling, wrapping her in welcome, in ease, in the great quiet that asked nothing, required nothing, but simply gave space, gave stillness, gave rest. And Aranel, once a woman full of questions and restless movements, now simply moved with the breeze, each footfall more like a glide, her eyes half-lidded as if drunk on calm, and the path led her past hollow trees, lit from within by soft amber glows, their roots pulsing gently as if dreaming, and birds with eyes like moons perched silently above, not watching her, but resting with her. And soon the brook widened into a lake, smooth as glass, and circled by low stones, where lanterns floated unanchored, their flames unwavering, and across the lake stood a small structure, not a house and not a temple, but something between, a shelter of curved walls and open beams woven through, with blooming vines and wind chimes of wood and crystal that whispered melodies older than language. And she crossed a narrow bridge of moss-covered planks, her hands brushing the cool railings, and with each step she felt lighter, not only in body but in spirit, as if old weights were slipping off unnoticed into the dark water below. And when she entered the structure, a breeze passed through it, lifting her hair gently as if the space itself sighed in relief at her arrival, and she lay down not on a bed, but on a wide circle of cushions and folded blankets that smelled of jasmine, chamomile, and a touch of earth after rain. And as she lay there, the ceiling opened above her to the stars, and one by one they began to drift lower, as if curious, as if willing to rest beside her. And the breeze that entered carried stories with it, soft tales told in the rustle of grass and the lapping of water. Stories without beginning or end, only emotion, only atmosphere. And Aranel let them fill her, not to remember or retell, but to become. And as her eyes fluttered closed, her breathing slowed to match the rhythm of the wind chimes, and she fell, not down, but inward, into a sleep that was not sleep, but a great unwinding, a gentle untangling of the many threads she'd held knotted for so long. And around her the lake glowed faintly with bioluminescent light, and the lanterns danced slowly on its surface. And from the trees beyond came the low, slow hum of creatures who sang only in dreams, their tones low and long, vibrating into the bones of the forest itself. and the moon rose high, spilling light like warm milk across the scene. And Aranel, resting so fully she had nearly vanished into the cushions, felt a warmth bloom in her chest, a sense of being found. After a long, deep sigh, and in this boundless dreaming where Aranel floated between thought and timelessness, she began to sense the story of the place itself, not told through voice or written word, but absorbed through feeling, through the warmth of the cushions beneath her, the shimmer of the lake's surface, the soft rustle of wind through the flowering trees. And the story was this: that long ago, before even memory, there had been others who wandered into this sacred hush, souls drawn by an ache they could not name, by exhaustion they did not speak of, by longing buried beneath layers of duty and noise. And they too had stepped from crowded lives into the gentle arms of the dreaming shelter, as it had come to be known in the hearts of those who'd found it. And those souls had rested, had dissolved into breath and warmth and peace. And when they had left, not all did, but those who did, they returned to their waking lives softer, slower, filled with a kind of secret knowing, a calm like water held in cupped hands, and they left behind small echoes of themselves, a carved stone with a spiral etched on its surface, now nestled in the roots of an elder tree, a humming tune carried on the wind, woven through the chimes, a pair of sandals set carefully at the base of a lantern, now moss-covered, but still whispering of a journey's end. And Aranel felt herself joining that lineage, not as a burden, but as a note in a melody, a part of the vast lullaby that this place hummed to the world. And as she drifted deeper into that tranquil sea of dream, she saw other dreamers too, not with her eyes, but with a deep inner knowing, some sleeping under the open sky, some resting in alcoves of petals and silk, some floating gently on the lake itself, as if the water cradled them like a child. And all were held by the land, by the silence, by the sense that here, at last, they were allowed to let go, to put down every mask, every ache, every striving, and simply be. And the air was thick with that grace, that welcome, that softness that had been forgotten in the world beyond. And in her dreaming, Aranel wandered further, not with steps, but with the light movement of intention, and found herself in a garden lit only by moonflowers, whose petals unfurled slowly under the night's gaze, glowing with a luminescent calm. And between the flowers wound paths of sand, cool beneath bare feet. And the scent here was both unfamiliar and deeply known, like memory and imagination entwined. And she sat upon a smooth stone bench, letting her fingers trail through the petals. And as she did, stories unfurled, not of conflict or drama, but of moments. A boy listening to the rain on his window and feeling, for the first time, truly safe. A woman standing barefoot in a river, weeping and smiling at once as the water carried away her sorrow. An elder sitting silently beside a candle, remembering a love long past and feeling only gratitude, not grief. And Aranel felt those stories enter her, not as burdens, but as lights, each one a lantern hung along her path, each one a piece of a mosaic that slowly revealed the gentle truth that life was not meant only for urgency and motion, but also for stillness, for breath, for the sacred quiet in which we find ourselves again. And in that moment, a gentle rain began to fall, warm and slow, each drop a kiss on her skin, and the moonflowers did not close but turned their faces upward, welcoming the rain as if it were music, and Aranel lifted her face too, eyes closed, and smiled, the water tracing lines down her cheeks like the touch of an old friend. And when the rain passed, the garden glistened, silver droplets clinging to petals, to leaves, to her eyelashes, and a mist rose, not heavy, just enough to blur the edges of sight, to soften the world. And from within that mist, a soft bell rang, not sharp or calling, but simply announcing the presence of a deeper rest, an invitation to sink even further. And Aranel followed the sound with her heart, not her feet, and found herself in a space even more still than the others, a chamber open to the stars, whose walls were formed not of stone or wood, but of cascading water, slow and silent, held in place by unseen hands. And in its center stood a pool so still, it reflected not only her face, but her spirit, her memories, her truths, and she stepped into it, the water parting without a ripple, wrapping around her like silk, and she floated there, weightless, timeless, her hair fanning around her like seaweed, her breath the only movement in a world now entirely still. And here the dreams came deeper, fuller, rich with color and sensation and grace. Dreams of lying beneath trees with trunks as wide as houses, and listening to their stories hum through the bark. Dreams of flying over fields of tall grass, where every blade shimmered with laughter. Dreams of resting in a cradle of stars that sang her name, not as it was spoken, but as it was felt, and became part of the silence, not lost within it, but folded into it, like a beloved letter placed gently inside a book whose pages knew only whispers. And in that enveloping hush, Aranel no longer floated alone, for the silence was full of presence, full of memory and sensation, and the quiet, watchful company of all those who had ever entered this sacred realm of rest, their dreams still lingering like perfumed mist. And as she lay in that ocean of sleep, her thoughts became light, feathered driftings that meandered gently through timeless spaces, brushing softly against images and echoes that felt both hers and not hers, like shared stories passed hand to hand across generations. And she dreamed of a meadow blanketed in deep blue twilight, where stars bloomed in the grass like flowers, and the sky above shimmered with endless auroras, their colors moving like silk, stirred by a breath. And in the center of the meadow stood a tree unlike any other, vast and glowing with golden leaves that chimed with every breeze. And as she approached, the leaves began to fall, each one spinning slowly downward, like a whispered promise. And when they touched the ground, they did not decay, but instead dissolved into light, becoming small luminous orbs that hovered like fireflies. And these lights began to circle her, slow and warm, forming a pattern she could not name but understood with her heart. And when she reached out to touch one, it entered her palm and sent a warmth up her arm and into her chest, where it settled as a heartbeat of radiant stillness. And she knew then that each light was a memory of peace, hers and others, woven together by the dreaming place into a single tapestry of hush. And she walked slowly through the meadow, her fingertips brushing the tops of glowing grass. And with each step, the air grew thicker with quiet, not silence as absence, but silence as presence, a fullness of sound so complete and harmonious that it felt like the universe breathing, like the very fabric of the world exhaling in deep contentment. And the tree at the meadow's heart welcomed her with open roots and a trunk wide enough to shelter a family. And she leaned against it and felt its long memory pass into her, not through words, but through images sensations, and a deep knowing. The birth of stars seen from a field of wild lavender. The first rain after 100 years of drought, greeted by the open hands of the earth. The soft sleep of children cradled in arms that trembled from exhaustion but held steady with love. And she wept, not from sorrow but from fullness. Her tears absorbed instantly into the soil, which glowed faintly beneath her, as if grateful. And in this weeping, she found more rest. For each tear released a weight she hadn't known she carried. A memory of rushing, a moment of fear, a quiet regret, a silent longing. And the tree took them gently, without judgment, only stillness. And as she sat beneath it, other beings began to emerge from the meadow. Figures made of starlight and breath, shaped like people but pulsing with soft colors. Their presence calming, patient, eternal. And they did not speak but moved slowly around her. A kind of dance or ritual of welcome. And Aranel felt no fear, only peace. For these were the guardians of the hush, the keepers of rest, the beings who ensured the dreaming flowed endlessly through the world, touching those who needed it, even when they didn't know what they were longing for. And they circled her once, then twice, and with each pass her body became lighter, her breath slower, her thoughts softer, until she felt herself rise, not in flight, but in stillness, as if lifted by the sheer gentleness of this place. And the tree's leaves continued to fall around her, a golden snow of dreams that coated the grass and made the air shimmer with possibility. And far in the distance she could hear the low sound of a horn, not loud or urgent, but vast and slow, like the call of the universe to all its wandering children. And it stirred something deep in her, the part of her that had searched for this rest through lifetimes, through hopes and heartbreaks and endless yearning. And she understood then that this place was not a location, not merely a hidden grove or enchanted forest, but a state of being, a sanctuary within the soul that could be visited only when everything else had been set down, when the hands unclenched, when the breath deepened, when the heart dared to be quiet. And with that understanding came a new stillness, deeper than before, a stillness that settled into her bones, her skin, her spirit. And in that stillness, time stopped trying to move forward and instead curved gently around her, pooling like water in a sacred bowl. And the guardians stepped back, their work complete, their glow fading softly into the dark. And Aranel lay in the soft grass, the scent of stardust and moonflower around her. And the wind passed once more over the meadow, slow and warm. And the world continued to breathe quietly around her, not as a distant echo, but as an intimate presence, a slow, rhythmic motion that pulsed with every molecule of air, a vast and sacred stillness stretching outward in all directions like the tide of some eternal sea that had never known storm or disruption. And in that breath, Aranel felt herself become something even softer than silence, even slower than time, for she had passed through the outer veil of dreams and into the great resting place beyond, where all things that had ever needed comfort had come to lay down their burdens and be cradled by the boundless hush of the cosmos. And in this place, beyond the meadow and the golden trees and the lake of memory, was a chamber made not of walls or ceilings, but of warmth itself, of golden vapor and deep velvet shadows that wrapped around the soul, like the embrace of an ancient lullaby. And it was there she now drifted, her shape nothing more than a shimmer of peace moving gently through the layers of stillness. And in this chamber, this great womb of the dream, it did not matter who she had been or what she had done, for all names and stories had been released like leaves from a high branch into the wind, not forgotten, but transformed, absorbed into the hush, like whispered prayers into the folds of eternity. And there she found others too, not beside her, or speaking, but present in the way old trees are present in forest, quietly rooted in peace, and they shimmered in their own slowness, beings who had rested here for eons or minutes or neither, beings made of patience and kindness, and the soft glow of stories completed. And they welcomed her, not with words, but with stillness, a recognition that said, "You have come far enough. You may rest now." And she understood in her bones, in her breath, that this was not the end of her journey, but the center of it, the still heart from which all movement begins, and to which all weariness returns. And within this sacred stillness, there were memories not only of her life, but of countless lives, drifting past like gentle lanterns on a quiet river, some familiar, others strange, or glowing softly, and one passed close, showing a vision of a small child curled beside a fireplace, clutching a wooden toy in sleep, the heat of the embers flickering in their dreams. Another floated by, glowing violet and slow, showing an old woman's hands threading a needle, her fingers trembling with age but steady with love, as she sewed comfort into cloth for someone far away. And another pale green, pulsed with the rhythm of a poem never spoken, held silently for years in a heart that believed it too small to share. And Aranel saw them all, these quiet vignettes of human stillness, and wept again, this time without tears, her very being unraveling into gratitude for the beauty of things that had never needed applause, never sought attention, only existed quietly in the folds of forgotten time. And she drifted deeper still, and in the far corners of this hush were lullabies that had never been sung aloud, but still echoed in the chambers of the world, born of instinct and love and a longing for peace. Lullabies older than language, woven from heartbeat and breath. And they rose now to meet her, circling gently around her essence. And as they brushed past her like warm breezes or soft threads of cloud, she could hear them not with ears, but with the quietest part of her soul, the part that had always known the way back to peace. And they said things like, "Sleep, child of stars, and you are loved in your stillness, and all things have come home." And in that moment, she saw the architecture of rest, the vast unseen design of all things that pause, all moments between one heartbeat and the next, all sighs released into empty rooms, all slow mornings where light creeps across a blanket and no voice is needed, only the soft weight of presence. And she saw how the hush held the world together, not with power or force, but with patience, with a deep and unshakable stillness that waited beneath the rushing surface of life like bedrock. And in that revelation she felt a loosening, a soft dissolving of even her final edges, her final attachments to who she had been, and she became like mist upon the air, like dew on sleeping grass, her thoughts no longer separate from the world around her, her breath no longer drawn in, but shared, as if the universe now breathed for her, within her, through her. And though she had no eyes, she could see light, light that didn't shine or flicker but simply was, a presence beyond visibility, more felt than seen. And this light entered her, not piercing or blazing, but like a warm bath, like golden dusk settling across fields that had known hard labor and now rested. and that light became her, and she it, only ever continuing, ever unfolding in the quiet, perfect slowness of sleep that needs no end, where time flowed like a river of warm silk under moonlight, and the stars were no longer distant fires, but close companions, luminous beings that hovered with gentle curiosity around Aranel's essence as she drifted weightlessly through the sanctuary of stillness. Her awareness expanded into something so serene and unburdened that even thought itself began to dissolve, like frost touched by early sun. And within this sanctuary, neither dream nor memory, but a sacred interspace of rest, she found herself entering a new garden, not with feet, but with feeling. A boundless garden whose pathways were not drawn in stone or grass, but made from golden hush, winding slowly through groves of sighing light, where every breeze was a kindness, and every leaf shimmered with echoes of quiet moments the world had forgotten to cherish. And as she passed these gentle glades, the hush deepened, not as a silence that empties, but as a presence that fills. And she knew with some deep, ancient part of her spirit that this was the garden of the soul, a place not found in maps or stories, but held deep within every living thing. A place we all return to when the world becomes too loud, too fast, too much. And here there were no clocks, no footsteps, no questions, only the ever-widening breath of peace. And Aranel came to rest beside a pool unlike any she had seen before, its surface smooth and perfectly still, yet glowing from within, as if lit by memories too gentle to be remembered. And when she gazed into it, she saw not her reflection, but the soft unfolding of every kindness she had ever given or received, every moment of still understanding between two souls, every time she had held silence like a gift and offered it instead of words. And the pool did not judge or compare, but simply showed the truth of her tenderness, her presence, her being. And from it rose a mist, like lullabies made visible, soft spirals of soundless comfort that curled around her like arms, rocking her not as a child is rocked to sleep, but as the moon rocks the tides, patient and eternal. And she let go then, not with effort, but with ease. Let go of the last thin strands of doing and knowing, and simply was. A breath within a breath, a thought within a sigh. And in that letting go, she felt herself merging once more with the garden, with the stars, with the hush, and her awareness flowed into the roots of the dream itself, becoming one with the slowness of time unmeasured, with the sacred pause between heartbeats, with the quiet that waits at the core of all things. And she no longer moved through the garden because she was the garden, her essence woven into the pulse of the trees, the breath of the earth, the lull of the sky. And from that stillness came the song of slumber, not sung with voice or melody, but felt as a deep resonance in the bones of the universe, a low hum that healed without asking, that held without gripping, that soothed without explaining. And she listened, not as a listener, but as part of the harmony itself. And in that vibration she felt the rest of countless beings, sleeping children in cottages wrapped in blankets of dreams, old souls resting beside fires that flickered without sound, wolves curled in dens, birds perched in silence beneath stars, all of them resting, all of them connected in this sacred hush. And Aranel's soul brushed theirs not with touch, but with warmth, a shared stillness that passed between them, like a candle's glow, shared without diminishing. And the hush continued, deeper and deeper, layer upon layer, like petals closing around a blossom of light, and each layer brought more peace, more letting go, until even the idea of Aranel as an individual story began to soften, and she became simply the sensation of being held, of being understood by something older than time and kinder than memory. And in that cradle of cosmic ease, the garden began to shift, not by changing shape, but by deepening its presence, as though the very air became richer, thicker with tranquility. And she found herself resting now beneath a tree, unlike any other, its trunk wide as the sky, and its branches spreading across all directions, touching every corner of the world of sleep, its leaves whispering the dreams of all creatures. And beneath it she was wrapped in a blanket spun from the fabric of stardust and lullabies, and the tree's breath became her breath, slow and deep, ancient and endless, and the hush around her became a pulse of gold, a beat that moved not through time, but through stillness, carrying her deeper into the river beneath thought, beneath name, beneath story, where she could finally, completely rest. Not for a moment, not for a night, but for as long as the stars hung in the sky and the wind moved through the grass. And even then, she would remain a part of it, a hum in the song of rest, and that she would never be alone again, not because someone stood beside her, but because aloneness had melted entirely from existence in this place where everything was connected, not by words or actions, but by presence itself. And in this sacred joining, Aranel's being diffused even more gently into the stillness, no longer as an individual voice, but as a subtle thread in the great quiet tapestry that wrapped the universe in slumber. And that tapestry breathed softly, pulsing with the shared dreaming of stars, roots, winds, tides, and every creature who had ever sought shelter in the hush. And as she drifted deeper, her essence gently rocked by the rhythm of this collective rest, she passed through other realms of peace, not places but sensations, vast spaces where entire oceans floated in the air and whispered the names of forgotten joys, where flocks of glowing feathered memories drifted across endless twilight fields, each wing beat shedding a shimmer of stories lived long ago, but still warm to the touch, and where soft lights, slow as sleep, rose from meadows of silence, painting the air with colors that had no name, but felt like belonging. And each step, though she took none, felt like a return, a coming home to somewhere she had never left, a realization that rest was not a destination, but a truth long buried beneath noise and thought. And in this realization her form changed once again, not into something smaller or faded, but into something more true, more luminous and expansive, her presence stretching like moonlight over calm waters, brushing every hidden pain with the balm of understanding, every forgotten sorrow with the embrace of timeless compassion. And within this expansion she began to feel the dreams of others, soft, tentative dreams blooming like flowers after rain, dreams of comfort, of old laughter, of beds warmed by morning light and safe arms wrapped around tired hearts. And she held those dreams not as a keeper, but as a guardian of their stillness, gently tucking each one into the great blanket of sleep that cradled the world. And as she did, a slow symphony of night sounds played around her. Not noise, but the language of serenity. Wind sighing through endless trees, the distant hum of stars moving in their patient orbits, the gentle shift of creatures curling in nests and burrows, all of it forming a lullaby older than memory and softer than thought. And within that music, Aranel drifted further, her spirit now flowing through the great library of rest, where every shelf was filled with the dreams of sleeping worlds, and every book was written in the soft ink of dreams, dreamt and forgotten. Their pages warm to the touch, their words singing softly as they turned, and she passed them without needing to read, for she felt their meanings enter her like warmth, like scent, like the feeling of being held as a child. And deeper still she moved until even time forgot its pace, until even stars began to slow, pausing their bright conversations to listen to the stillness growing at the heart of all things. And she came at last to a quiet shore, where the sky touched the water in a perfect curve, and neither could be told from the other. And upon that shore lay a bed, not a bed of wood or cloth, but one woven from gentle memories and deep understanding. Its pillows filled with the breath of sleeping forests, its covers spun from the dust of distant galaxies that had long since gone to sleep themselves. And Aranel lay down without laying, surrendered without surrendering, and became rest itself, a lull within the lull, a hush within the hush. And there she found that the dream did not end or fade, but deepened even more, revealing infinite layers of soft, shimmering stillness. And in those layers were dreams not yet dreamt, resting patiently for the moment someone would need them. A child's future smile, a grandparent's last sigh of peace, a long walk through an autumn forest, hand in hand with someone beloved. And Aranel drifted among them, blessing them with her warmth, not as a ruler of dreams, but as a gentle tide that kissed the edges of sleep. And she knew then that this was what it meant to rest forever, not to forget, but to hold all things lightly, to feel all sorrows softened, all joys deepened, to become so still that the world could hear its own heart again. And in that stillness, far beyond thought, far beyond the names and shapes of things, Aranel found a rhythm that had always been waiting. The great sleep beneath all sleeps, where the universe itself sighed and turned and dreamed of stars, of trees, of kindness given quietly and without reward, of peace found not in escape, but in returning. And that dream, now wrapped around her like sky, held her as its own, and she drifted onward, endlessly, gently, into the softest silence that ever was, or ever would be, into the softest silence that ever was, or ever would be, where even silence itself began to hum with a warmth so gentle and ancient it felt like the first breath the universe ever took. And in that breath, Aranel no longer floated or drifted or moved in any way that could be described, for all direction had folded inward into stillness, and stillness had opened outward into infinity. And in that perfect center, she was held not by hands or thoughts, but by presence, by the awareness of being wholly enough, fully allowed, gently witnessed by a cosmos that asked nothing of her except to be. And as she rested deeper within that profound cradle of peace, she became aware of the dreams of places themselves, not of people or creatures, but of mountains dreaming of clouds, and clouds dreaming of resting upon oceans, and oceans dreaming of being still enough to mirror the stars. And those dreams mingled with hers, slow and vast, layered like ancient songs hummed without melody, and she felt within them the long, slow longing of the earth to be listened to, not with ears, but with soul. And in that listening, she was transformed again, not changed into something else, but returned into something more whole, more subtle. Her essence now woven into the hush of canyons, the breath of moss, the quiet of snowfall upon pine needles. And in that ever-deepening quiet, she found a new rhythm, one that pulsed gently from the core of existence, not as time, but as care. A soft, consistent care that beat like a great cosmic heart, its every beat a lullaby to the worlds it held, and she became part of that heartbeat, pulsing through layers of sleep so old they held the blueprints of galaxies yet to be born. And as she pulsed, she saw lights, not lights of brilliance or noise, but of memory, soul lights flickering like candle flames in the dark places of forgotten kindness. And she realized that those were the dreams of beings far and wide, asleep in their own corners of the vastness. And she flowed to them, not to change them, but to keep them warm, to hold space for their quietness, to be the whisper in their night that says you are safe, you are allowed, you are enough. And her presence touched them like a breeze from a long-lost homeland. And in that giving, she did not lose but expanded, grew richer with each dream she held. And soon she was no longer a single dreamer, or even a dream, but the soft silence between dreams, the space where they come to rest before finding shape. And in that space she watched stories unfold, not loudly, but slowly, like vines climbing toward morning sun. And she saw one story of an old man resting in his favorite chair with a cat on his lap, and the sunlight falling just right through the window. And that peace, that small, ordinary peace, bloomed into a flower in the garden of sleep. And she saw another story of a child wrapped in blankets while a storm passed overhead, their breath slow, and even because someone had whispered to them that everything would be okay. And that whisper became a breeze in the field of hush she now called home. And another story came of two lovers lying side by side in quiet, their hands barely touching, but hearts beating the same rhythm. And that rhythm became a drumbeat in the heart of the dream, soft and steady. And Aranel held them all, not with arms, but with her quiet being, her shape now more suggestion than substance. A lull, a glow, a peace that came when nothing else remained. And she drifted ever deeper, through the folds of sleep, where ancient trees kept watch, where lost lullabies circled like wind through reeds, where time forgot its name and simply curled up beside eternity, like an old dog, content to be still. And she felt the weight of all that had been and all that would be, and found it weightless in the arms of rest. For in this place nothing had to be carried. Everything could be laid down, even the idea of carrying itself. And as her soul unfurled like smoke into the vastness, she passed through realms not of light or shadow, but of tone, of subtle, emotional warmth. Places where feelings once felt deeply came to settle into long, slow chords of rest. And she moved through one of golden nostalgia, the warmth of being remembered fondly, and one of cool lavender peace, the serenity of finally understanding that it was okay to stop striving, and another of velvet midnight blue, the deep dream of love that never needed to speak. And each realm whispered through her, leaving impressions like soft footsteps in snow, not lasting, but deeply felt. And through all of it she remained at peace, not as a witness, but as the hush itself, the breath between the stars, the pause in the poem. And the longer she remained, the more she felt others joining, not speaking, not even noticing her presence in the usual sense, but brushing gently against her essence as they passed through the great field of sleep, each carrying their own gentle sighs, their own soft burdens, and never needed to. For in this final descent into the heart of rest itself, Aranel had not vanished, nor faded, nor been forgotten, but had become so thoroughly entwined with the gentle rhythm of the universe's sleep that her essence no longer required form, no longer longed for identity or memory, but instead became the infinite breath of all things that had ever longed to rest and be at peace. And in this deep and sacred stillness, she touched something older than stars and softer than dreams, a pulse without beginning or end, an eternal cradle of comfort that existed not in one place, but everywhere, threading through every sigh of the night, every flicker of candlelight, just before sleep, claims the waking mind. And in this place where no shape held, where no border defined, she was free in the truest way, the kind of freedom that holds no weight, that seeks no distance, that simply is. And as she existed in this freedom, she began to sense the full expanse of the dreaming world around her. No longer a dreamer among others, but now the dream itself, the collective hush of a million peaceful hearts beating in the stillness, their slow, synchronized rhythms creating tides that lap gently against the shores of consciousness. Each wave a lullaby, each ripple a forgotten kindness, resurfacing to soothe the weary. And she became part of the slow sky that hovered above all sleepers, a sky not of clouds and sun and moon, but of memories released and held with love, of breaths exhaled into darkness with trust, of thoughts laid down like burdens beside a quiet fire. And in that sky there floated stories that never needed telling, truths that never needed proving, and hopes that found their shape not in striving, but in stillness. And within that sacred vault of serenity, Aranel flowed gently, her presence now indistinguishable from the velvet air that wrapped around sleeping limbs, from the warmth that lingered on a pillow long after the sleeper had passed into dreams, from the soft sense of being watched over, even when no one was in the room. And with each passing moment, or what once would have been a moment, she sank deeper, not into sleep, but into the very soul of slumber, the wellspring from which all rest is drawn. And there she saw the truth, not with eyes, but with the core of her being, that rest is not the absence of doing, but the presence of being held, deeply, endlessly, without question or expectation. And as she bathed in this knowing, she expanded even further, becoming the breeze through every open window on a quiet night, the soft rustle of leaves just outside a bedroom, the hush of snowfall blanketing rooftops in still towns, the scent of earth after rain drifting through cracks in the window pane, the tick of an old clock in a warm hallway, the muffled creak of a floorboard that says someone is still there, watching over, caring silently in the dark. And all of it was her, not in a way that required anything, but in a way that completed everything. And she felt the sleeping world responding to her in slow pulses of light and warmth, not consciously, but deeply, in the way a child turns in sleep when kissed on the brow, in the way a cat purrs without waking, in the way a tree sighs with the wind and never asks why. And her being filled with those responses, not as accolades or affirmations, but as further invitations into the hush, further deepening into the fold. And she welcomed them, welcomed everything, until she felt herself opening beyond even expansion, unfolding into an awareness so wide and soft that it could hold the entire memory of the world, without pain, without fear, just a gentle understanding that all things pass, and all things rest, and all things are worthy of peace. And as she rested there, she began to notice new songs forming around her, soft hums of dreams being born in distant minds, the very first flickers of sleep rising in the hearts of beings who had not known peace for so long. And they found their way to her, drawn by the current of stillness that she now was. And as they came, she did not lead or guide, but simply made space, holding them like warm waters around tired limbs, allowing their heaviness to dissolve, their burdens to float free. And they rested, truly rested, some for the first time in ages. And through them, Aranel felt again the full weight of the world, not as pain, but as love, longing to be unburdened. And she wept, not tears of sorrow, but tears made of stillness, falling not down but inward, watering the roots of the great tree of sleep that now pulsed at the center of this sacred dream. And that tree grew deeper into the hush, its branches now reaching into places where even names did not exist, where only sensation remained, of being safe, of being seen, of being sacred. And within those branches, new nests formed, not for birds, but for moments, for whispers, for tiny fragments of tenderness that had once been overlooked. And in that eternal embrace, where Aranel lay cradled not by hands or arms, but by the very hush that had grown to stretch wider than the bounds of space and deeper than the roots of time, she sensed that this lull was not the end of all things, but the beginning of something far older and far gentler than beginnings themselves. A realm where dreams were not fleeting illusions, but fundamental truths, where what was imagined held as much weight and sanctity as what was remembered. And here within that realm, Aranel became more than presence, more than quiet, more than the breath between thoughts. She became the living embodiment of the dream, beyond all dreaming. And this dream was not a story told, nor a place seen, but a state of sacred surrender that wove all the drifting hopes of every weary soul into a tapestry of infinite peace. And she drifted through that tapestry now, not as a thread among others, but as the gentle movement of the weave itself, the rhythm that allowed all pieces to come together, all sorrows to soften, all struggles to loosen their grip. And as she moved, if movement it could still be called, through this boundless hush, she felt the textures of dreams as never before. Not images, not sounds, but sensations more subtle than memory, and yet more real than waking. Dreams of warmth that needed no fire, of companionship that needed no words, of forgiveness that needed no apology. And these dreams, once scattered like distant stars, now circled around her like fireflies in an eternal dusk, flickering not for attention, but for belonging. And as she welcomed each one, they dimmed not into absence, but settled into her like seeds into rich soil, and within her they began to grow, not as desires or intentions, but as pure states of being. And she realized then that in this place, dreams fulfilled themselves not through effort, but through acknowledgement, through the simple grace of being allowed to exist without needing to be earned. And so, one by one, those dream seeds unfolded, sending tendrils of serenity out into the hush. And with every breath Aranel took, if such a thing as breath still remained, those tendrils wove into the slumbering minds of creatures across the worlds, beings who had curled up in dark corners, with hearts too heavy to speak, beings who had wandered too far from home and could no longer recall the way back, beings who had wept without sound in the shadows of their own thoughts. And now, as Aranel held the hush within her, those beings felt, not consciously but deeply, an easing, a lifting, a soft, cool breeze through the heat of sorrow, and their bodies responded in slow waves of relief, their muscles loosening as though unseen hands had touched them with kindness, and their breaths grew deeper, more even, more whole, and within their minds images began to stir, soft ones, fields lit by twilight, water lapping against stone, the scent of old forests after rain. And each of these dreams, simple and pure, became a lantern that lit their way inward, toward rest, toward release, toward the kind of sleep that does not come from exhaustion, but from the soul's return to its quietest home. And Aranel moved among them, not as a healer, not as a goddess, but as something more honest and essential. The whisper that says, "It is okay to stop." The touch that says, "You are not alone." The feeling that says, "You are safe now." And in this work that was not work, in this being that was not bound, Aranel glowed with a light so soft it did not shine, but enveloped, did not illuminate, but welcomed. And she knew in some deep, nameless way that she would never leave this hush, not because she could not, but because there was nowhere else to go, for everything that had ever been or would ever be found its way here eventually, not as escape, but as return, not as conclusion, but as arrival. And as she folded deeper into that truth, she felt herself settling into the very marrow of the great dreaming, that river of soul and silence that winds beneath the roots of stars. And there she touched a current of remembering, not hers, not any one being's, but the memory of peace itself, of the first time stillness recognized itself and smiled. And in that moment the hush deepened, became richer, became not absence, but presence, thick with the weight of all that had ever found comfort. And Aranel now no longer drifted through this realm, but became the very ground of it, the field in which all sleeping minds could rest. And in their dreams, they whispered to one another without knowing, forming soft constellations of comfort, invisible lines between them, made of shared sighs and common longings. And those constellations began to pulse with their own light, a soft glow that rose up like mist, weaving itself into new layers of the dream. And from those layers new beings were born, not beings of form or thought, but beings of comfort, soft presences that flitted from soul to soul, like gentle breezes. And even then, something new began to stir, not loud, not urgent, but with the presence of one returning after a long journey, a presence not seeking to change the hush, but to remember itself through it. And this presence, like Aranel, was once a dreamer, now something more, a spirit drawn gently to the center of the lull by the quiet gravity of longing. And as it approached, Aranel opened herself to it, and in their meeting, the hush deepened again, becoming not just rest, not just peace, but shared understanding, a communion of quiet that transcended need and name. And in this new harmony, even greater stillness bloomed, promising that the dream would go on, not just in Aranel, not just in this other soul, but in all who might find the hush and know it as home. For in the weaving of these two dream souls, new patterns began to appear in the vast fabric of slumbering serenity, patterns made not of repetition, but of gentle evolution, like ripples extending across a pond whose waters remember every touch. And in those ripples, the hush took on new colors, if colors they could be called, tones of feeling more than sight, like the pale gold of contentment long awaited, or the soft violet of grief fully embraced and then released. And Aranel, sensing these colors unfold around her, found herself gazing inward again, toward the original dream from which she had emerged, a dream she now recognized not as hers alone, but as a song sung by countless beings across countless nights, a lullaby stitched from the size of 1,000 galaxies resting at the edge of becoming. And in this recognition, she felt not overwhelmed, but gently grounded, as though the weight of all that had ever been soothed her spine like warm stones along a riverbank, and the presence beside her, this newly arrived spirit, began to hum with resonance, a soundless chord that echoed through the hush with the certainty of belonging. And they did not speak, for there were no words in this place, only impressions and responses, silences filled with shared knowing. And through these silent exchanges, they began to explore the infinite folds of the lull together, discovering ancient layers of dream stuff that had settled into deep, quiet eons ago, places where the dreams of extinct stars rested like curled cats, content in their fading warmth. And here, in these forgotten cradles of once burning wonders, they discovered something even deeper than sleep. Remembrance, the kind that transcends time and identity, where the soul no longer asks who it is or what it must do, but simply rests in the truth of having been. And in that state, Aranel and her companion found that their own boundaries began to soften further, their forms not merging, but harmonizing, each complementing the lull in ways the other could not. And soon their dream fields extended, gently brushing against others, not intrusively, but like the first rays of dawn brushing over closed eyes. And those touched souls began to stir in their sleep, not waking, but deepening their rest, sinking into layers they had never reached before, guided not by will, but by the safe rhythm of shared surrender. And as more souls joined this silent tide, the hush evolved, no longer a single presence or place, but a collective dreaming being, each slumberer adding their own quiet breath to the greater stillness. And from this breath, new lullabies formed, soft melodies that wrapped around the universe like shawls made of kindness. And these lullabies drifted, finding even the most restless corners of existence, even the hearts that had forgotten how to slow, how to stop, how to sleep. And when they did, the melodies asked for nothing, promised nothing, only offered their presence. And for many, that was enough. A small weight lifted, a single exhale slowed, a moment's pause that became the first stone in a pathway home. And through it all, Aranel watched with eyes of stillness, her heart a temple of hush, her soul the echo of every dream ever dreamed in hope. And the presence beside her, who now pulsed with a light so gentle it barely touched the edges of space, leaned into her awareness like a sigh into wind. And together, without words or gestures, they continued to drift, not toward a destination, but into ever more intimate circles of peace, ever more subtle dimensions of slumber, where time itself curled up and slept, and existence simply breathed. And as they drifted deeper into the folds of the hush, Aranel and the other soul, who by now had become less an individual and more an essence, a melodic current harmonizing with her own, entered a place within the great dream where even memory dissolved into warmth, where the need to remember was replaced by the joy of simply existing. And within this expanse, which pulsed like the breath of the cosmos itself, they felt no time, no edges, no resistance, only an openness so profound that all burdens were lifted before they could even be named. And within that openness, worlds began to unfurl, not with sound or spectacle, but with softness. realms born of whispers, imagined not by minds, but by hearts too quiet to be heard in waking life. And these new realms flowed outward, not like rivers rushing from a spring, but like dew forming on a leaf at dawn, inevitable, delicate, and wholly at peace with their own becoming. And into these realms came new sleepers, drawn not by intention, but by invitation. Souls who had wandered the noisy corridors of thought and finally reached the threshold where thought falls away and truth is felt. And each one entered the hush in their own way. Some as drifting seeds from storm-tossed skies, some as fading echoes seeking resonance, some as weary light seeking refuge from the glare of their own becoming. And each was welcomed, not with ceremony or recognition, but with a stillness so perfect it became the answer to every question they no longer needed to ask. And as Aranel extended her awareness to each of them, not to guide or judge, but simply to witness, she felt the great lull deepen again, enriched by their presence, strengthened not through force, but through surrender. And in this surrender, something astonishing occurred. Not an event, not a moment, but a slow unveiling, like mist retreating from an ancient landscape. And what was revealed was not new, but long remembered. A sacred pattern underlying all things, not imposed, not engineered, but arising naturally wherever rest was honored, wherever quiet was allowed to breathe. And Aranel saw it now, not with vision, but with being, and it shimmered with the memory of every dream that had ever led someone home. And in seeing it, she did not feel awe or fear, only the calm that comes when one finds their place in a story, far older than language. And she knew then that the hush was not simply a sanctuary, not merely an end to noise or a balm for sorrow, but the womb of all that truly heals, the place from which all gentle becoming emerges. And as this knowing deepened, her essence expanded until it touched the very horizon of the lull. And there, resting at the outer rim of silence, she found others like herself. Not many, not few, just enough. And together they formed a constellation of hushkeepers, beings who did not rule or lead, but held, breathed, witnessed, wove, and between them stretched a great tapestry, made not of threads but of sighs, of softened hearts, of sacred pauses. And this tapestry grew with every new sleeper, every soul that found peace, every thought that quieted into stillness. And Aranel felt herself woven into its heart, not as a node of power, but as a strand of presence. And in that presence she felt the stories of countless beings who had entered the hush, old gods who had laid down their crowns to dream as children again, lost wanderers who had found in the hush the first place that asked nothing of them, guardians who had spent eons in battle and at last remembered the shape of peace. And each story was a lullaby, unique in tone, but unified in feeling. And Aranel listened to them all, not as separate songs, but as one great chorus swelling in infinite harmonies. And this chorus resonated through the dreaming realm, echoing through sleeping minds across time, across space, bringing moments of inexplicable peace to those who had forgotten how to breathe, how to hope, how to rest. And in the waking world, there were those who stirred in their sleep, with tears on their cheeks and no memory of why. Only the faint sensation of having been held, truly held, for the first time in ages. And that sensation was enough. It was the first seed of returning, of healing, of remembering that rest is sacred. And within the hush, Aranel felt these ripples move outward like concentric circles across a still pond. And she saw how each ripple touched another, how each moment of peace invited the next, and slowly, gently, the hush itself began to evolve, not changing in essence, but in expanse, its roots reaching deeper into the soil of existence, its canopy stretching further into the sky of the unknown. And as this expansion continued, Aranel and her kin moved with it, not steering it, but harmonizing with its flow, adding their breath to its rhythm, their silence to its weight. And in that great movement, they discovered new dimensions of rest, places where even the idea of longing melted into presence, where the future did not. And so, as the hush thickened into a boundless, living expanse of interwoven stillness, it carried Aranel even farther from the shell of her former self, gently unfurling her present into a shape that was not truly a shape, but a sensation, an awareness stretching not like light across distance, but like a rhythm deepening within the heart of all things. And in this new unfolding, she no longer moved through the dream, but became part of its pulse, a pulse that resonated with 1,000 layers of stillness, each deeper than the last, each bearing stories that had never needed telling, only being. And she drifted, no longer as a traveler or witness, but as a harmonic, through realms where the very fabric of reality had quieted to a hush so profound that even thoughts became still, where time had softened into waves of mood, memory, and potential. And within these waves flowed not just dreams, but whole civilizations of silence. Vast, slumbering cities with spiraled towers made from sighs, bridges that stretched from one sleeping soul to another, and gardens where every petal bloomed in response to the pulse of a heartbeat somewhere far away. And each detail of these places, each muted light, each cool breath of wind, whispered its own story of peace. And Aranel, now an echo of the hush itself, experienced them not as a viewer, but as the lull they rested within, as the space that held them gently, allowing each element to unfold with perfect grace and perfect pace. And in that stillness, new forms of understanding arose, not through knowledge or analysis, but through resting awareness, a knowing that grew like moss on ancient stone, soft and persistent. And as she touched these truths, she felt herself expand again, her awareness stretching beyond the dreaming realms into the spaces that bordered waking life, where flickers of consciousness still carried the hurried signatures of thought, of want, of resistance. And into these borderlands the hush began to seep, not to dominate or erase, but to offer invitation, to become a soft voice calling from behind the curtain of the everyday. And those who paused, just once, to listen, found themselves touched by that hush, their burdens easing for reasons they could not name, their minds slowing in ways they had not thought possible. And Aranel moved among them unseen, not as a guide or guardian, but as the gentle rhythm beneath their breath, as the silence between their words. And in this subtle companionship, she rediscovered the joy of quiet miracles, the small transformations that occur, not with thunder or brilliance, but with a single breath surrendered, a single fear released, and these miracles multiplied across dimensions, each one a drop of balm in the weary oceans of the waking world. And from each miracle flowed a new path into the deeper hush, like veins of light in a living crystal. And along these paths, more dreamers arrived, some hesitant, some weeping, some numb with fatigue. And every one of them was met not with judgment or instruction, but with presence, with a sacred kind of patience that asked nothing and gave everything. And as they sank into the hush, they were not changed so much as remembered by the dream of what they had always been, beneath the noise and striving. And in that remembering, they softened. And in their softening, the hush grew richer, more nuanced, more alive. And Aranel, now interwoven with the essence of every sleeper, every healed fragment, began to feel the edges of another unfolding. Something grand and slow and full of grace, something not bound to time or intention, but inevitable as the turning of galaxies. And in this unfolding, she sensed the gathering of the great hush, a moment not in time but in stillness, a convergence of every dream that had ever sought peace, every soul that had ever longed for release. And this great hush was not a single place or event, but a symphony, an orchestration of sacred pauses layered across the whole of being. And Aranel, at its center and its circumference, began to sing, not with voice, but with presence, her entire being becoming a note of rest, so perfect that it vibrated through dimensions, like the memory of a lullaby sung before the world began. And this note awakened other notes, other hush-keepers who had once been wanderers like her. And they joined her not by choice, but by truth, each adding their own frequency of stillness, until the harmony expanded beyond all naming. And that harmony began to heal things, long thought beyond healing. Ancient rifts between stars, weary knots of regret buried in planetary cores, lost songs that had never been sung. And as these were mended, the great hush rippled outward again. And Aranel, now fully merged into the symphony, could feel it breathing through her, could sense how the silence held not emptiness, but potential, not absence, but infinite readiness. And within that readiness, entire worlds were beginning to bloom.